I didn't think anything would change that weekend. Not really. We'd been doing trips like this since college. Ever since our first late-night pact to never grow up too seriously. Same friend group, same lakehouse, same dumb inside. Jokes recycled year after year, but this time felt different. Maybe it was the way the air felt a little thicker when he was around. Or maybe it was just me, finally getting honest with myself after years of brushing it all off as harmless fun. The house was nestled in a secluded cove, 3 hours from the city, tucked beneath pine trees that whispered when the wind moved through them. It was the kind of place where the world slowed down just enough for thoughts to catch up, whether you wanted them to or not. I was the first to arrive. I always liked it that way. Something about watching the place wake up, the dust catching in the morning sun through the window panes, the wooden floors creaking like an old friend saying hello, gave me space to breathe. I set my bag down in the same room I always took, the one with the little balcony that overlooked the dock. And then, as I stood there, stretching out the stiffness from the drive, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart thudded before I even turned around. He stepped out of his car wearing that same gray hoodie with the torn cuff on the right sleeve. His hair was longer than usual, curling at the edges, and he had that easy, lopsided smile like the world hadn't ever managed to weigh him down. "Guess who forgot snacks again?" he called out, holding up an empty tote bag like it was a trophy. I rolled my eyes, grinning despite myself. Classic. "Good thing I brought enough to keep you alive." "You always do," he said, and for a split second, his eyes held mine just a little longer than necessary. That was him. Effortlessly present. He didn't have to try to pull you in, he just did. He'd always been that kind of guy. Warm. Chaotic. A little reckless. The type to cannonball into a freezing lake just to prove a point. Then complain about it for hours while you handed him towels and pretended not to care too much. We'd known each other since junior year. First meeting. In an elective neither of us cared about. He'd offered me a stick of gum, and I'd refused. Not knowing it would be the start of a decade of shared playlists, movie marathons, and increasingly questionable dares. And yeah, some nights, I wondered, when he'd rest his head on my shoulder mid-movie. When he'd say things like, "You're the only one who gets it." When he called me at 2 a.m. just to talk about nothing, but I never let it grow into anything. I couldn't afford to. I liked our rhythm, the late-night beers, the stupid traditions, the way we'd accidentally end up next to each other in every group photo. And yet, as I watched him now, his hand ruffling through his hair, the way he laughed at nothing in particular, I couldn't ignore the tug in my chest. "Come help me unpack," he said, jerking his thumb toward the car. "I brought enough board games to last us through a nuclear winter. Just admit you want me to carry all the heavy stuff." "Guilty," he shot back, flashing that grin again. But then, softer, almost to himself, "Glad you're here. First though, missed hanging out, just us." I looked away, pretending to inspect the wheel of his suitcase, but my mind was buzzing. Just us. It was a phrase he said often, and every time, it sank a little deeper. I took the suitcase and followed him up the stairs, feeling the warmth of his presence just ahead of me. His hand brushed mine as he handed over a second bag. Just a second, no big deal, but I felt it. Felt it in a way I hadn't let myself admit before. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Or maybe this was the weekend everything changed. It didn't take long for the rest of the group to show up, trailing coolers and Bluetooth speakers, and the kind of chaotic energy that always made the lake house feel more like summer camp than a relaxing getaway. But even in all that noise, my eyes kept drifting back to him. He was everywhere, laughing on the porch, grabbing the speaker first so he could hijack the playlist, tossing me a beer without asking if I wanted one. He never had to. He just knew. We'd shared so many of these weekends over the years that I could trace the map of his quirks without even thinking. Like how he never finished a bag of chips, but always opened a new one. Or how he could never sit still for long, always fidgeting with something, his hoodie strings, a bottle cap, a folded napkin. Or how his voice dropped just a little when he was tired, softer and unguarded. Like he forgot to hold up the version of himself that joked too much and meant too little. "You're staring," he said later that afternoon, catching me mid-thought, as we sat by the dock, skipping stones like we had 100 times before. "No, I'm not," I said too quickly. And he laughed like he didn't believe me for a second. "Worried I'm about to beat your record?" he teased, his eyes flicking sideways to mine. "You haven't beat my record in 3 years. Maybe I've been going easy on you, huh?" He grinned, tossing another stone. It landed with a pathetic plop. Okay, maybe not that easy. That was us. Always on the edge of something unspoken, but always present. We joked, we teased, we touched more than we needed to. A hand on the back when walking past, a knee knocking against mine on the couch. Once, a friend even asked if we were together. He'd laughed it off, and so had I. But now, under the late afternoon sun, I found myself watching the way the light caught the curve of his jaw, the way his lashes framed his eyes when he looked down, and something inside me tightened. Dinner was loud. Someone burned the garlic bread, and no one really cared. The wine flowed faster than it should have, and the playlist devolved into nostalgic hits we could barely remember the lyrics to. He sat across from me, leaning back in his chair, his fingers tapping absently on his glass. Every now and then, he'd meet my eyes across the table and smirk, like we were the only two in on some private joke. Later, when the night chilled and people began peeling off to their rooms, we found ourselves alone in the living room, the fireplace flickering low. I was nursing the last of my drink, and he was sprawled across the floor, legs stretched out like he owned the space. "Hey," he said, tugging on the blanket I had wrapped around my shoulders. "Move over. You've got the whole floor. But you've got the blanket." I rolled my eyes, but scooted over anyway, and he slid in beside me, our shoulders brushing. We sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance. "Do you ever think about how different everything would be if we hadn't met in that class?" he asked suddenly, his voice quiet. I looked at him. "Sometimes. Yeah. I was such an idiot back then. Still am, probably." "You're less of one now," I said, nudging his arm lightly. He smiled at that, but there was something heavier behind it. He shifted, leaning his head back against the couch. "I don't know. Lately it just feels like everyone's moving on. Jobs, relationships, big life stuff. And we're still doing the same old lakehouse trip." "We like the same old trip." "Yeah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I wonder what we're avoiding." I didn't answer right away. I didn't trust myself to. And maybe that was the moment, the first crack in the wall we'd both been hiding behind. But before I could say anything more, someone called from the hallway. "Guys, problem." We looked up. Maya stood there, a frown pulling at her lips. "So, apparently one of the rooms has a busted heater. And guess which room you both randomly got assigned to share?" He blinked. "Wait, what?" "Yeah, the bunk buddy's room," she said, using finger quotes. "No heat, like none. So either you two want to freeze your asses off, or one of you bunks elsewhere." I felt his gaze before I turned to him. "I don't mind sharing," he said casually, but there was a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. "Me neither," I replied, trying not to sound like my heart was hammering in my chest. Maya gave a shrug. "Cool, problem solved." After she left, we just sat there for a beat too long. "So," he said finally, breaking the silence, "guess we're back to college rules." "Yeah, just don't steal all the covers this time. I make no promises." He smiled again, but his voice held a different note, no softer, less certain. I caught him glancing at me more than once as we gathered our things and headed to the room. When we got there, The air was cold enough to see our breath. He rubbed his arms. Damn, Maya wasn't kidding. I pulled the extra blanket from the closet, tossing it over the bed. We'll survive. We both stood there for a second, staring at the bed like it was some kind of dare. And then, silently, we moved, climbing in on opposite sides. Close, but not too close, not yet, but the space between us, it wasn't nearly as wide as it used to be. I don't know what I expected to happen when we climbed into that cold bed, but it sure wasn't lying there for hours, hyper-aware of every breath, every shift, every tiny sound he made beside me. He was close, not touching close, but enough that I could feel the dip in the mattress where his body weighted it down. I could hear the rustle of his hoodie every time he adjusted, could sense his warmth under all that stillness. I stared at the ceiling, willing myself to relax, but my chest wouldn't stop fluttering, like my body was preparing for something my mind hadn't yet agreed to. I didn't sleep much. At some point, I heard him exhale slowly and roll over, and then his voice broke the dark. You awake? My throat was dry. Yeah, you cold. I hesitated. A little. Same. This blanket's useless. He didn't say anything else for a second, and then, more quietly, come here. I turned my head toward him, my breath catching, before I could stop it. What? I mean, if we huddle or whatever, you know, body heat, it's science, he said, suddenly sounding bashful, like he regretted saying it the moment the words left his mouth. My heart thudded in my ears. Right? Science? I shifted toward him slowly, like I was approaching something fragile. My fingers brushed his arm first, and even through the fabric, it sent a jolt through me. He was warm. He didn't flinch. Instead, he opened the blanket slightly, inviting me closer. I slid in, careful not to breathe too hard. My body suddenly buzzing with awareness. I could feel everything. The way his shoulder curved toward me, the rise and fall of his chest, the scent of his shampoo, clean, earthy, something that felt safe. My arm brushed his side. I didn't move it. Better, he murmured. I nodded. Yeah, but it wasn't just better. It was dangerous, because now I couldn't pretend the space between us was empty. I couldn't pretend the tension in my chest was just from the cold. I wanted to stay like this. I wanted to move closer. I shut the thought down hard. We were friends. Best friends. I couldn't screw that up over a maybe. Over a feeling I'd never had the guts to say out loud. He let out a slow breath. You ever think about stuff you don't say? My eyes stayed on the ceiling. All the time. Yeah. He was quiet for a beat. Like what? Don't say it. I swallowed. Like what if things were different? He shifted slightly. Different how? I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. Different like, I don't know. Less complicated. Easier to say things. He was quiet for a moment, and then, what would you say? I froze. The silence stretched. Too long. I couldn't do it. Not like this. Forget it, I said quickly. I'm just tired. He didn't press, but I felt him still beside me. His breathing steady but his body tense. And after a long time, he said, almost a whisper, me too. We fell asleep like that, barely touching, but every nerve in my body felt like it had been struck. The next morning brought sun, coffee, and awkward smiles. He acted normal, like nothing had happened, like we hadn't spent a night in each other's arms, sort of. He teased Maya about burning breakfast and made a show of stealing a pancake off my plate, like always. But his hand lingered a second too long when he passed me the syrup, and when no one was looking, his eyes met mine, searching. Unreadable. That afternoon, a few of us decided to take the hiking trail behind the house. It wound up toward a bluff that overlooked the lake, one of those steep, unsteady climbs that left your legs aching but gave you the kind of view you felt in your chest. The others turned back halfway through, but he and I kept going, saying we wanted the full view. The truth, I wasn't ready to go back, not yet. Not when being around him felt like this, like holding my breath, and not being sure when to let it go. By the time we reached the bluff, the sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting everything in that warm, golden hush. We stood there, both quiet. "You ever feel like this place freezes time?" he asked, sitting on a rock, arms draped over his knees. "Yeah," I said, settling beside him. "Like we can just pause here?" He nodded. "Sometimes I wish I could." I glanced at him. The sunlight lit the edge of his face, catching in his eyes. I couldn't tell what color they were in that moment, only that they looked soft dot. And then it happened. He reached out, brushing a pine needle off my shoulder. His fingers lingered. My breath caught. He didn't pull away. I started, and then stopped. He looked at me. His gaze wasn't teasing this time. It wasn't casual. It was open, almost vulnerable. "Can I tell you something?" he said quietly. "Yeah," I whispered. He glanced away, like saying it to the trees would be easier. "Last night wasn't just about being cold. I just wanted to be near you. I always do. And I don't know what that means, exactly, but I've been thinking about it for a long time." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. "You mean, he?" turned back to me. "I don't know how to say it right, but when I'm around you, everything feels easier, even the hard stuff. And when I'm not around you, I miss you in this stupid, aching way that doesn't make sense for just friends." I stared at him, barely breathing. And then, like I'd been holding it in for years, the truth tumbled out. "I feel the same. I just didn't want to ruin what we had." His face broke into the softest smile. "You didn't ruin anything," he said. "You made it real." He reached for my hand, then slow, careful, like asking a question. Our fingers touched, slid, together, and everything stilled. We sat there like that, hand in hand, the lake stretching out beneath us, and the wind rustling through the pines. The air was quiet, but inside, I felt the noise settle for the first time in years. We didn't talk much on the way back down the trail. Our hands stayed loosely twined together, brushing now and then as we navigated the roots and rocks, our silence warm instead of awkward. Every now and then, he'd glance over like he wanted to say something more, but neither of us dared to break the moment too quickly. By the time we reached the lakehouse, the others had already gone out for pizza and drinks in town. They'd left a scribbled note taped to the fridge. "Back in a bit. Don't burn the place down." He laughed when he saw it, shaking his head. Classic. But I could hear the edge in his voice, like he was stalling, trying to hold on to the quiet between us. I felt it too. Whatever had cracked open up on that bluff hadn't closed again. Not even close. We ended up on the porch. He grabbed 2 beers. I brought out the blanket from the night before, and we sat on the old swinging bench facing the water. The sky had shifted to that deep cobalt blue that only came just before full dark. The lake reflected it perfectly, endless, full of things we hadn't said. He sipped his beer and nudged my foot gently with his. "So? Can I ask something kinda personal?" I glanced over, heart ticking faster. "Sure. That thing you said, about not wanting to ruin what we had." He paused, watching the condensation drip down the side of his bottle. "Was that just fear talking? Or did you really think it wasn't worth the risk?" I swallowed. The answer pressed against my chest like a weight I'd carried too long. "It wasn't about what we had not being worth it," I said quietly. "It's that. It meant everything. You mean everything. And I didn't trust myself not to mess that up." He looked at me then. Really looked. "I was afraid to," he said, "but for the opposite reason. I thought, if I didn't say something soon, I'd lose my mind. Every time we did these trips, I'd hope something would shift, that maybe you'd look at me the way I looked at you. And then when you didn't, I figured maybe I was just imagining it. I felt like the air had been pulled straight out of my lungs. I was looking at you," I whispered. Every time. He set down his beer, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Then why didn't you ever?" "Because I didn't know how to let it be real." I was scared you'd pull away, that if I reached out, you'd flinch. I wouldn't have, he said instantly. I turned toward him, and the rawness in his face almost undid me. You don't get it, I said, voice thick. I've watched you fall in and out of things with people over the years. Crushes, flings, stuff that didn't last. And every time, I'd think, why not me? But then I'd tell myself it was better not to ask. Better to stay your person quietly than risk being no one at all. His face shifted, pain, understanding, guilt, all at once. He moved closer on the bench. You've always been my person, he said. That's the thing. Nobody else came close, and I didn't know how to deal with that, so I joked. I distracted myself. I pretended I was okay with being just friends, because I thought maybe that's all you wanted. We were sitting so close now that our knees touched. My breath shook as I tried to find words for the ache rising in my throat. I think I've been in love with you for longer than I even knew what that meant, I admitted. It's always been you. Even when I tried to date other people, it was still you. He looked stunned. Not because he didn't feel the same, but because I'd said it finally, out loud. Without hiding, he reached up slowly, brushing his fingers along the side of my jaw. My skin tingled under his touch. You could have told me that 3 years ago, he said softly, smiling through something wet in his eyes. I'm telling you now. I leaned into his touch without thinking, eyes fluttering closed for a second. And then, in that stillness, he kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, like testing the weight of something precious. His lips met mine gently, and I melted into it, every bit of tension I'd carried for years slipping away as I kissed him back. His hand slid to the back of my neck, fingers curling in the hair there, grounding me. I felt his breath against my cheek when we broke apart. Wow, he said, voice barely there. Yeah. We both laughed, soft, shaky, disbelieving. He leaned his forehead against mine. I was so scared you didn't feel it. I felt everything. My voice cracked on the word. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, the bench swaying gently beneath us, the lake murmuring in the distance. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, and I let my fingers trace the seam of his sleeve, the torn cuff I'd memorized years ago. And then he said, I don't want to go back to pretending, not after this. You won't have to. We sat in that promise. It didn't need explaining. It was just ours now. Later, when we finally stood up, his arm wrapped around my waist like it belonged there. I rested my head on his shoulder as we walked inside, our footsteps in sync, our hands still laced together. The living room was quiet, the fire just embers now. I started to pull away, not sure what came next, but he didn't let go. Hey, he said, tugging me gently back, toward him. Come here. I stepped into his arms, and he wrapped them around me, holding me like I was something he didn't want to let go of. Not just a crush, not a maybe, something real. I wish I'd said something sooner, I murmured against his chest. He kissed the top of my head. We're saying it now. That's what matters. And as we stood there, wrapped in each other, I realized I didn't feel scared anymore. I just felt home. The next morning, I woke up with his arm draped across my waist and sunlight pouring through the curtains. The blanket had slipped halfway to the floor, but I wasn't cold, not with him curled against me like that. For a few seconds, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. The night before hadn't been a dream. The kiss, the confession, the quiet I love you hidden in our silences, it was all real. His thumb moved slowly against my side, like he was already half awake, tracing small circles through the fabric of my shirt. I turned to look at him. He was watching me, blinking sleepily, the corners of his lips tilted into that soft, sleepy smile I'd never seen from him this close before. Morning, he said, voice low and gravelly. Hey, I whispered back, unable to stop smiling. He stretched, yawned, and pulled me a little closer. So, We're doing this, huh? I laughed softly. Seems like it. I was worried I'd wake up and you'd be halfway down the mountain. You'd come chase me. Damn right I would. He grinned, then leaned in and kissed me against low, familiar already. It didn't feel strange or rushed. It felt like something we'd been quietly moving toward for years and had finally caught up to. Okay, now this is unfair, he said, tugging at the collar of my shirt. How do you look this good in the morning? I look like I fought a bear in my sleep. You did kick me in the leg at some point. He gasped dramatically. A vicious accusation. You're lucky I'm still here. I'm lucky in a lot of ways, he said, his voice softening. We stayed like that for a while, kissing between whispered jokes, teasing each other, talking about nothing and everything until we heard the front door swing open downstairs and the unmistakable sound of Maya announcing, "We brought waffles." He looked at me, grinning. We should probably get up. Probably. Neither of us moved. Eventually, we forced ourselves out of bed, cleaned up, and joined the others like we hadn't just rewritten the story of our friendship overnight. It was strange, at first. Every look between us felt heavier. Every casual touch carried more weight. And yet, it wasn't uncomfortably. It was grounding, familiar, like we'd only now started saying what our bodies had known for years. At breakfast, he passed me the syrup with a ridiculous wink. I rolled my eyes, but my smile gave me away. Maya gave us a squinty look. Okay, what's going on here? Nothing, he said too quickly, biting into his waffle. Lies, she muttered, and went back to her coffee. Later, as we walked down to the dock, he grabbed my hand without thinking. I glanced at him, heart thudding again, despite everything, and he just shrugged like it was the most natural thing in the world. It's weird, I said. What is how not weird this feels? He laughed. I know exactly what you mean. We sat at the edge of the dock, legs swinging over the water. The breeze was gentle, tugging at his hair. He leaned into my side, head resting against my shoulder. I keep wondering what this means, I said after a while. When we go back, you've got your life, I've got mine, and we've been in this little bubble here, but... He nodded, picking at a loose thread in the sleeve of his hoodie. I've thought about that too. I mean, yet'll be different. We're not exactly starting from scratch, though. No, I agreed. We've already done the hard part, knowing each other. He looked up at me. I want to try, whatever this is, however messy or weird or uncertain it gets. I want it. You sure? He reached out, lacing our fingers together again. I've never been more sure of anything. I exhaled slowly, letting that settle inside me. Okay, I said, me too. He leaned in, pressing a kiss to my temple. Good, because I've got years of catching up to do. All the flirting I held back on. You have no idea. Oh God, I groaned. You're going to be insufferable now. Absolutely, he beamed. Get ready. And just like that, it was easy again. No overthinking, no fear. Just the two of us, still us only now. The distance we'd carefully maintained for so long was gone. The lake rippled gently beneath our feet. The sky stretched wide above us, blue and open and full of promise. It wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. We left the lake house 2 days later, but something in me had already decided not to leave him behind. The car ride back was quiet, in the best way, his hand resting on the console between us, fingers brushing mine with every curve in the road. Every so often, he'd glance over with that lazy smile, like he still couldn't believe this was real, and honestly, neither could I. I don't think we spoke about the what now until we were already halfway home, the city skyline starting to creep back into view, life slowly reclaiming its normal rhythm. So, he said, shifting in his seat, this weekend was kind of life-faltering. I huffed a laugh, turning my head to look at him. Kind of. He gave me a look. Okay, very, wildly, incredibly, life-altering, happy, getting there. He paused, and then said, I don't want to pretend nothing happened. I don't want to fall back into whatever we were before. Good, I said, more quickly than I meant to. Because that would hurt more now. I mean it, he added. I want to build something with you. Not just lakehouse weekends, and sleepovers, where we almost but don't. My heart caught on those last words, how true they were, and how much it meant to finally be past that. I reached out, sliding my hand fully into his. He squeezed it. So, I said, we start with awkward phone calls and cheesy texts. Cheesy texts are a must, he replied, and random coffee drop-offs, and maybe letting people know we're, together. He nodded, glancing at me with a kind of softness that made everything around us blur. Yeah, we didn't make a big announcement. That wasn't our style. But it didn't take long for the people who mattered to notice the way we sat closer now, touched more freely, smiled like we were holding secrets we no longer had to keep. A week later, he showed up at my apartment with a pizza, a six-pack, and a grin that looked like home. I opened the door to him in sweats and bare feet, hair a mess from too much work and too little sleep. He looked me up and down and said, God, I missed this. You everything. He stepped inside, set the pizza on the table, and then handed me something. It was a small keychain, stupidly cheap-looking plastic, shaped like a tiny waffle. I stared at it. Is this breakfast-themed symbolism? He laughed. It's the first thing I could find that made me think of us. You remember that one morning at the lake, when Maya made those burnt waffles, and you still ate them because you didn't want to hurt her feelings? I groaned. Tragically, yes. You looked at me across the table, he said quietly, and smiled like it was the best thing you'd ever eaten. That's when I knew what? That I was already falling. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full of all the things I never knew I'd get to feel. Standing there barefoot in my tiny kitchen, holding a plastic waffle from the guy who knew me better than I'd ever let anyone know me. I hung the key on the hook by the door, right next to my actual keys. My real life. I'm keeping it, I said. Forever. Good, he replied. Because I'm not going anywhere. We sat on the couch that night, legs tangled, faces lit only by the TV. We barely paid attention. 2. He rested his head on my chest, fingers tracing lazy lines along my wrist. There were no big declarations, no dramatic music swelling in the background, just us, quiet and whole. And in that quiet, I made a promise I didn't speak out loud, but I knew he'd hear anyway, that I'd keep showing up for this, for him, for us. Weeks turned into months. We learned how to exist outside the lakehouse, real schedules, separate homes, shared plans. We fought sometimes, sure, about stupid things like whose turn it was to buy groceries, or who stole the blanket at 3 a.m., but every fight ended with a touch, a look, a kiss that reminded us why we chose this in the first place. The last time we went back to the lakehouse, just the two of us this time, he brought a second keychain and another plastic waffle. We hung it on the rearview mirror of his car, and he said, so we don't forget where we started. And we won't. Because even now, even when things get messy or uncertain, I look at him and feel the same thing I did that night on the bluff when he reached for my hand. That quiet knowing, that safe kind of love, the kind that lasts not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And this is only the beginning.